Breaking news to CNN, Iran's foreign minister is now warning Israeli citizens to avoid being near any military and intelligence sites as Iran launches new attacks. We're joined now by Avi Mayer. He's the founder of Jerusalem Journal and the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Avi, thank you so much for being with us. Are there concerns about how Israel's air defense system is holding up amid these continued strikes from Iran?
Well, Boris, good to be with you. It's actually been quite remarkable to see how effective Israel's air defense has been over the past 6 days. We understand that roughly 90% of projectiles that have been fired by Iran at Israel have been intercepted. And the devastation, while certainly significant, has been far lower than the projections. We've had about 24 fatalities. Again, every single fatality, of course, is absolutely tragic. But what had been predicted were hundreds or perhaps even thousands of fatalities in the event of war with Iran. And so I think many Israelis, while of course being cautious, are also quite relieved to see that Israel's air defenses are doing exactly what they should be at this time.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, though, is saying that all of Israel is paying a price amid this conflict. I wonder what you're hearing from Israelis about what's shaping up to be a prolonged engagement.
Well, look, at the end of the day, Israelis understand that this is a fight for our survival. Israel cannot live with the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran, a country that says openly it wants to destroy the Jewish state and is actively pursuing the means to effect that goal is not one that Israel can live alongside. And so Israelis are actually widely supportive of this military campaign. You have figures in the opposition, including the leaders of Israel's opposition, saying that they support Israel's government at this time. And so while, of course, the price that has been paid and probably will continue to be paid has been painful, this is, I think, a price that many Israelis view as worth paying in order to ensure our ultimate survival.
I do want to ask you, Avi, about the damage to the Soroka Medical Center, because critics of the Israeli government argue that it's hypocritical to say that Iran has crossed a red line with this attack, while the IDF has repeatedly attacked hospitals in Gaza, including an attack as recently as overnight in which certain children were killed at a camp. What do you make of that argument?
There's absolutely no comparison, zero, none at all, between an intentional effort to harm a civilian hospital in Israel, as took place this morning, and Israel's efforts to target Hamas facilities within and beneath hospitals in Gaza. It is a double war crime that Hamas commits by exploiting these hospitals in Gaza as basis for their operations. This isn't an allegation from Israel. It's something that has been demonstrated by foreign news outlets that have been in these hospitals and have seen Hamas taking part in the activities there. They've seen armed activists taking part in the activities in these hospitals. They've seen the facilities beneath them as well. And the notion that there could be some kind of comparison between the intentional targeting of a civilian hospital in Israel, as we see happened this morning with unbelievable destruction and effect, and the intentional targeting of Hamas facilities in hospitals in Gaza is really quite absurd.
The Iranians make the claim that they weren't directly, intentionally targeting the hospital. You obviously don't believe that line. I want to ask you about the Israeli defense minister saying that Ayatollah Khamenei should no longer exist. Do you think regime change has now become the Israeli government's explicit goal?
Well, just to refer to what the Iranian foreign minister said, it is absolutely preposterous to suggest that Iran is not targeting civilians. Every single one of its attacks in recent days have targeted civilians, and we've seen widespread destruction in residential areas in Israel. The only fatalities at this point in Israel have been civilians. There have been no soldiers who have been killed, and so the notion that they aren't targeting civilians is absolutely preposterous. As for whether or not Khamenei should be eliminated, whether that is something that should be an ultimate goal, I think that many Israelis are coming to terms with the notion that a world leader who targets them, who targets their families, is not one they can live alongside. And I think the defense minister was perhaps expressing that sentiment yesterday. It is not, as we understand it, the view held by the prime minister at this time, but that could certainly change if Iran continues to target civilians as it has over the past 6 days.
What do you imagine the aftermath of regime change in Tehran would look like? And would Israel be equipped to handle something like that on its own? Because there's enormous trepidation within the United States about another prolonged Middle Eastern war and nation building and all that comes with it. I wonder what you say to those folks who argue that the United States should hold back?
Look, ultimately, it is for the Iranian people to decide who their leaders will be. Israel is not involved in that effort and shouldn't be. I don't know that other countries would be either. But ultimately, I think that there is a desire, a quest for freedom in Iran. We see incredible waves of support for Israeli action amongst Iranians in Iran and around the world. And they see that this is perhaps an opportunity to overthrow this oppressive regime that has been subjecting them to such horrific torture for so many years now. Ultimately, though, that is their decision, not Israel's, and I don't think that Israel has any appetite to replace this government with any other. All we want is to ensure our own survival. And so long as that threat is removed, so long as the tyrannical regime that is affecting this effort to build a nuclear weapon in order to eradicate Israel, as it says quite openly, is no longer able to do that, I think we would leave the rest of it in the hands of the Iranian people.
I totally understand that, Avi, but respectfully, very similar things were said about Iraqis determining the future of Iraq and people in Afghanistan determining the future of that country. There's a lot that goes into governing, much more than just, having the infrastructure to have an election and cast a ballot and determine its future. What do you say to folks in the United States who say that that would wind up falling in the hands of the U.S., and it could get messy, and we could wind up seeing a repeat of what we've seen over the last few decades with U.S. involvement in the Middle East?
Of course, Israel was not involved in the military campaigns in Iraq or Afghanistan. Neither of those countries were viewed as posing an existential threat to the Jewish state as Iran under its current leadership does.
I'm just comparing it to...
The comparison is really...
Well, I think the comparison is fair in that people called for regime change in those circumstances, and there were obviously justifications at the time for both incursions by the United States into these countries, but the aftermath of regime change is really what I'm talking about, and that gets messy. So what do you say to folks who say that regime change for the United States to support that would be a mistake?
Well, again, I would reiterate what I said earlier, which is that it is for the Iranian people to decide who their leaders are going to be. We certainly would like for there to be a leadership in Iran that is peace-loving, that is democratic, that wants to live alongside its neighbors throughout the Middle East in peace and harmony. That is what existed before the current regime came to power in the late 1970s. Israel and Iran actually have a long-standing history of close and friendly ties. That is certainly something that we would like to see again, but ultimately that is not Israel's role, and I don't know that it should be the U.S.'s role either. I think it should be for the Iranian people to decide who their leaders will be after this regime falls in whatever way it does.
Avi Mayer, we very much appreciate you joining us to share your perspective.
Thank you.
Still ahead, it is